This video is part 2 of the revolutions in design. This part of the lecture takes us into Russia. So the most spectacular outcome of the First World War was the collapse of 4 governments: the Ottomans, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. In terms of the impact on the visual arts, it was the disintegration of Imperial Russia that proved to have the most lasting effects. There was a long period of anarchy, with many sides trying to gain control of the country, but this ended in the fall of 1917 when the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin seized control of the country. It's amazing how much the political aspects of the world affected graphic design. Soon after the Bolsheviks' formation of a new government, anti-Bolshevik forces began organizing. The Russian Civil War of 1918-20 was fought between the Red Army and a coalition of forces led by military officers collectively known as the Whites, so the Reds versus the Whites. In 1918, Lenin oversaw a writing of a new constitution that voided the property rights of those he called exploiters, nobility, the upper class, and clergy. Based on the theories of German social activist Karl Marx, the new government adopted communism, a doctrine whereby private property was abolished and the means of production, which encompassed all aspects of economic life, were held communally by all citizens. The anti-Soviet whites were assisted by allied governments, including Britain and the United States. This led to increasing hostility between Russia and the Western democratic states. Amid the turmoil of the Civil War, the Bolshevik government saw the need to keep popular sentiment on its side. So they considered the state-sponsored use of the mass media to be a key element of the successful organization of a modern state and to spread the communist ideology around the world. As early as the time of the outbreak of the Russian Revolution in 1917, a community of Bolshevik poster artists began to grow. They sought to influence public opinion about the conflict, and they established the concept of agitation propaganda, sometimes shortened to agitprop, and a key strategy in the service of the revolution. The government devoted significant resources to selling of communist propaganda to its own citizens as well as to foreign sympathizers, and this tactic included the state-sponsored production of propaganda posters. The government supplemented the posting of images on urban hoardings in Moscow and Petrograd with the employment of boats, trains, and even horse-drawn carts plastered with posters to travel the countryside. These images circulated throughout the Russian territory, celebrating the revolution and calling the population to defeat the combined forces of the Russian counter-revolutionary imperialism and Western capitalism. The most prominent poster artist of the revolutionary years was Alexander Apsit. He learned his trade as a book illustrator and worked in a straightforward, realistic style. He grasped very effective ways of appealing to popular sentiment. His posters were so well known because they featured in runs up to 50,000, making him the father of the Bolshevik poster. And this is his poster called Two-Horse Proletarian. During the Civil War years, he produced around 40 lithographs, many which were designed in less than a day as events in the war shifted back and forth between the Reds and the Whites. Apsit demonstrated a good grasp of the Bolsheviks' favored theme of heroism in this poster. The direct appeal to the viewer's emotions and the simple color symbolism tie this image to the popular art of the lupki, which are prints with simple graphics and text based on popular stories used in homes and inns. In later years, the state would transfer this military symbolism to the domestic front, and images of hero workers and hero farmers would become a staple of the Soviet propaganda. In this work, Apsit went away from realistic subject matter in favor of inventive dramas that rely on symbolism and allegory. This symbolizes a caricature of the enemies to the revolution, both domestic and foreign. The bright color and graphic detail of this poster witness Apsit's awareness of the power of the lupki to grab the public's eye and provoke their imagination. It shows 3 icons of the exploiting classes being carried on a litter by an emaciated, despairing group of workers who are literally chained to their jobs. This poster transformed Apset's heroic cavalryman into a militant worker, shown fighting the dark force of capitalism. The simple red versus white symbolism, dynamic movement, and densely filled composition are all showing the poster's roots in Lubke tradition. In this image, the worker fights with a blacksmith's hammer, further tying together the themes of military industry with military service. If you look closely at the shield the knight is carrying, the red knight carries a shield embossed with what would soon become an official Soviet emblem, the hammer and the sickle. Dmitry Moore was the most accomplished designer of the heroic poster. He combined the two images that later became icons of the revolution, which was the combination of the star and the thriving factories churning out smoke that you can see in the background here. What is this poster based on? It's basically based on the pointing poster that was first introduced in Britain by Alfred Leet. And then the other style that you see is the simplification of form and flat background, which shows some embrace of German abstract styles. This also harkens back a little bit to the beggar staffs and even the flat planes of color in the Japanese May. His use of simple color, which is red, ties him to his native Russia. In the years just before the outbreak of the First World War, a thriving Russian avant-garde art scene had developed in Moscow. Russian intellectuals identified advanced culture with French society, so it was only natural that the new experimental artists based their work on what was happening in Paris. A painting style called Rayonism was developed, which was based on elements derived from analytic cubism, futurism, and a new ism called Orphism. To grasp the context of the Russian design from the revolutionary years, it's necessary to take a look at the artistic trends of the previous decade that did have impact on the future endeavors, which is why we kind of went back to their influence from Paris. The term Cubo-futurism is often used to reference to Russian work in this style. Around 1915, Kazimir Malevich devised a style called suprematism, which proved to have a long-lasting impact on graphic design. His paintings carried a cubist abstraction to its logical extreme, consisting of colorful squares and rectangles that appeared to float in infinite space. Malevich wanted to invent a new universal language with strong parallels to the later work of which movement, which was the De Stijl movement, brought about in the Netherlands. This work that you see here is entirely non-objective, meaning they bear no representational relationship to the natural world. He called his work suprematism in reference to the supremacy of pure feeling in creative art, indicating that his belief that abstract forms could convey powerful emotions. Malevich was optimistic that his work was a perfect fit for the new society that was arising after the Russian Revolution. This is a piece by Vladimir Tatlin. The newly founded Soviet Union obliged many Russian designers and intellectuals after World War I and the Russian Revolution to create new artistic styles for their new utopian society. The most influential group who tried to serve the state was the constructivists, who based their aesthetic on the pioneering sculptures of Vladimir Tatlin. He sought to use everyday materials of the industrial world, including iron, rope, copper, and wood scraps, to explore abstract beauty. He was a rival of Malevich during the war years and exhibited a series of sculptures influenced by Cubist techniques he called counterreliefs. Constructivist counterreliefs signify an important shift in his attitude to art. He conceived of art as directly tied to the industrial world and thought that artists should approach their work with the logical planning of an engineer. This allowed him freedom to experiment with different geometric shapes without being tied down by representation. In 1918, with the Civil War raging, a number of former expatriate artists assembled in Russia in the hope to play a role in building the new communist state. While European artists, such as members of De Stijl, never had a chance to witness dramatic transformation of their government, Russian intellectuals believed they had the chance to construct a new utopian society. Followers of Malevich and Tatlin thought that their work, filled with universal values, could help form a revolutionary visual identity for the new communist utopia. Initially, the new government embraced the aspirations of the avant-garde with enthusiasm. However, some Soviet officials criticized the avant-garde for their impractical experiments in abstract form. Because of this, Tatlin adjusted and adapted a more utilitarian concept of art. Constructivism, a term that was not used until 1921, featured a rejection of self-expression combined with a commitment to industrial materials, which sort of was in opposition to fine art, that made it a natural fit to the ideological goals of the new government. This is Tatlin's Monument to the Third International. This building was designed to reach a height of over 1,300 feet, with a spiral skeleton structure encasing a series of government offices. The monument required architectural sophistication well beyond the capabilities of Russian construction technology, but was still inspirational to a lot of people. He did build a 22-foot model, but few people outside of Moscow ever viewed it. He was never able to build this to scale. This poster, designed by Nikolai Punin, was a mass-produced presentation drawing published by Nikolai that initiated its iconic status as a symbol of triumphant communism. This print made the proposed monument famous across Europe, so even though it wasn't built, the poster made it famous. After the revolution, Malevich earned a new position in 1919 as head of a teaching studio at the State Art School in Vitebsk, led by expressionist painter Marc Chagall. He continued to promote the suprematist aesthetic and had a significant impact on students and colleagues, including L. Lissitzky. It was clear that suprematist principles were less directly transferable than constructivism to the service of revolutionary propaganda. By 1922, Malevich was forced to keep his continuing work on suprematist painting secret from his colleagues because it was considered a waste of valuable time and energy. This is a poster by L. Lissitzky called Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge. This famous poster from Civil War years by Lissitzky demonstrates how suprematist principles were sometimes successfully employed as propaganda in the service of the revolution. Despite the reductive geometric abstract forms, it is clear that Lissitzky is employing the same type of simple color symbolism and dynamic movement that realistically inclined poster designers were using in their works. Indirectly invoking the Lubach tradition, L. Lissitzky makes a simple, direct emotional appeal to the viewer. He believed that the universal language of abstract suprematism could convey meaning to both learned intellectuals and the illiterate peasants who were the main focus of the Agate Prop campaign. While suprematists found difficulty trying to reconcile their aesthetic beliefs with service to the communist cause, the constructivists, led by Varvara Stepanova and her husband Alexander Rodchenko, chose to renounce fine art completely. Constructivists coined the term productivism to indicate their desire to make works that served as a practical purpose within the context of the communist cause. They really sought to ally their art with industrial production and worked to design practical goods such as propaganda posters, workers' clothes, and government buildings. With the fine art approach of suprematism gradually suppressed, the aesthetic formulations of Malevich and others were partly absorbed into the constructivist aesthetic, so that after 1921, the two movements were largely woven together. Under the influence of the constructivists, graphic designers found a high level of status in society unlike any they had enjoyed before. Graphic designers took their place as ideologically pure artistic leaders. They rejected the term artist in favor of more practical words such as engineer or constructor. Soon after the Bolsheviks won in the Civil War, Lenin introduced the new economic policy. The NEP allowed for some new private enterprises to develop in competition with state-owned companies. This led to the need for increased advertising by state-owned firms, which turned to constructivist artists for their design projects. Rodchenko worked on a number of publicity campaigns for state companies and designed the first comprehensive corporate identity ever seen in Russia for the Dobrolay State Merchant Air Service. This brings us to mind the designer in Germany, Peter Behrens. This basic image in all of his design work for Dobrolay is a drawing of the Junkers aircraft. Rodchenko designs with economic necessity. The spare use of color in basic letterpress and typography were symptomatic of the general lack of resources that plagued Russia in the early 1920s. This makes you think of the color symbolism that is used in this poster. The continuing color symbolism of constructivist designs is the use of only red, which is the color of the communist revolution. Rodchenko's posters for Dobrolay combined constructivist design with slogans telling the viewer to invest in the airline for patriotic reasons. Quote unquote, "Shame on you, your name is not yet on the list of Dobrolay stockholders." This marks a contrast between Russian and Western advertising techniques, not trying to create a desire for a product, but basing his propaganda themes on guilt and duty. In 1923, Rodchenko joined with the avant-garde poet-activist Vladimir Mayakovsky in order to form an advertising firm they called Ad Constructor. Rodchenko's striking graphic style was combined with Mayakovsky's clever turn of phrase to create ads for state industries, including Mazalprom, a state-owned chain of food stores based in Moscow. The foods sold at Mazalprom were generic government products, lacking specific brand names or labels, so they had to create an identity for the goods through the poster designs themselves. This is Rodchenko's most famous advertising for Coco, one of Ad Constructor's images using one of Rodchenko's favorite compositional devices, the triangle. You can see the triangle here. The text makes use of many of Mayakovsky's typical devices: assonance, alliteration, and exclamation points. This use of repetition and aggressive emphasis neatly parallels the bold color and strong forms of Rodchenko's design. Mayakovsky's text urges the viewer to buy the product, invoking the health of the new Russian citizen. "Comrades, don't argue. Soviet citizens will become stronger in sport. In our might is our right, and where is strength? In this Coco." Soviet graphic designers were the most technically innovative and original artists of their generations. Among the first groups of artists to make use of photography and create ways in which photography and text could be integrated into a successful composition. The camera represented an opportunity for many artists to synthesize their love for modern machinery with constructivist aesthetics. Russian constructivists turned to the technique called photomontage. Photomontage was also used by the Dada artists. A photomontage is which you probably know, is a composite image made up of a variety of photographic source materials, which could include original artwork, but most often artists use images taken from magazines and newspapers. The compositions were made through a positive process where images are cut and pasted together to form a collage, which is then mass-produced by a letterpress or lithographic process. They could also be made in the darkroom, using photographic negatives and an enlarger. In Russia, it was hoped that the startling juxtapositions of photomontage could result in works that disrupted the conventional passive reception of photographs and unleashed the revolutionary potential of modern images. This is a photomontage by Alexander Rodchenko. He made some of his first photomontages when he collaborated with Mayakovsky on the publication of the writer's poem Pro Edo. Most of his montages combine figures with the elements of modern industrial life. The composition is based on a strong diagonal element, using empty space to draw the eye to the central mass. I absolutely love this image. It's got a woman, a man sitting at a table who are kind of looking at each other, and then you've got this random dinosaur. Rodchenko was also interested in filmic vision and often worked with a Russian filmmaker, Vertov, designing film titles for his documentaries. Vertov rejected storytelling and instead sought to energize the viewer with a camera that records the moments of everyday life in modern industrial Russia. The film Kino Glaz consists of a montage of newsreel footage celebrating post-revolutionary Russia. Rodchenko created a poster advertising the film using his favored triangular composition, so you can see that kind of here, formed by two faces that lead on diagonals through two motion picture cameras directly into the center of an eye. The photographs are all hand-drawn, as well as the block letters, as Russian technology was not up to the task of fulfilling artistic vision. Vertov had written a manifesto that the human eye and the camera eye could be merged. I am Kino eye, I am mechanical eye, I a machine. A design that Rodchenko created for a workers' club that was part of the Russian display at the 1925 Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes in Paris. The Workers' Club was exhibited in order to contrast the active participatory role of the industrial proletariat in a communal life in Russia with the passive, decadent, individual leisure of the European bourgeois. In this poster, Rodchenko wanted to memorialize Lenin, but also promote his policy of increased education for working people. And you can see this is called Lenin Corner, and here is Lenin up in the corner. Gustav Klutzis was one of the several constructivist artists who worked not only to create new graphics, but also to design dynamic display signs. His signs helped show the connection between his new technology and the new consciousness of the proletariat. These types of structures right here, like Tatlin's monument to the Third International, remain essentially theoretical, as few were ever constructed. The chaotic energy of Dada being absorbed into constructivism is apparent in this poster by Klutzis, publicizing the Spartakiada Moscow Athletic Games of 1928. While the overall design is orthogonal, there's a rhythm to the image that is more spirited than most constructivist graphics. Klutzis created an epic image that captures the vitality of athletic competition, and you can see the photographs being used in here as well. Athletes were often used as emblems of the new Soviet citizen and the quality of women under the communist regime relative to their ancillary role in Western European society, represented by the prominent photo of a female athlete in the upper right corner, was a major selling point of Russian propaganda. After Joseph Stalin came to power, there was increasing political pressure on artists to make works that presented Russian leaders in heroic terms. Klutzis was the most effective of the constructivists at using photomontage to glorify the communist leadership. Stalin was more hostile toward avant-garde art than his predecessors, including Lenin, and it was necessary for an artist who worked in the constructivist idiom to honor the great heroism of Lenin and Stalin at every opportunity. This poster by Klutzis, published by the state, demonstrates how effectively Stalin created overlapping cults of personality that tied his own rule to that of the original Bolshevik hero Lenin. Lenin's and Stalin's eyes are merged, suggesting the former's approval of the new successor. The strong diagonals that structure the composition capture the excitement and drama of massive factories and machines, which you can see down here at the bottom. Klutzis felt strongly that only radical new art forms such as photomontage were fit to convey the themes of revolutionary communism. The whimsical film posters of the brothers Georgy and Vladimir Sternberg provide an interesting alternative to the severe work of the constructivists. They completely revolutionized the aesthetics of film posters during the 1920s, using exciting compositional techniques that reproduced filmic vision, including the close-up and the freeze frame. Their expressive posters also made use of implied movement and shifts in scale and perspective would sometimes leave the viewer dizzy while evoking the intensity of the cinematic experience. This is their poster for the movie High Society Wager. The genius of Stenberg brothers was their ability to montage elements from a film in such a way as to produce an overall sense of the excitement of the drama. The posters are wholly original composition that captured the mood of the film at hand. Like Rodchenko, they had to copy the images by hand, resulting in posters that appeared to contain photo reproductions, but are in fact hand-drawn lithographs. This poster for the man with the movie camera is a total reinvention of how the movie feels. Nothing from the poster comes from the film other than the woman's face and the spiral, which brings to mind the lens of the camera. Under the tutelage of Malevich, Lissitzky created his own style of abstraction based on suprematist principles. He added elements of three-dimensionality, rotation and texture, and even realistic rendering in contrast to Malevich's reductive approach. He called this work Prown, or Project for the Affirmation of the New Art. So these are examples of Prown graphics, his posters for Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge and Of the Two Squares. Despite his early commitment to suprematism, he also collaborated with the constructivists so that his work after 1921 represents a mixture of the suprematist evolution of intuition and the abstract ideals with constructivists' beliefs that utilitarian work was morally superior fine art. In this photo montage, he shows the constructivist theme of artist as engineer. The combination of eye and hand, uniting intellectual and manual work, was an important part of the new identity sought by Russian artists in the 1920s. This also shows evidence of Lissitzky's experimentation with camera-less photography, as some of the background elements were made through direct exposure of photographic paper. Throughout the 1920s, Lissitzky traveled widely outside of the Soviet Union. Through his lectures, publications, and participation in conferences, he was responsible for creating interest in Russian avant-garde art among Europeans. He spent many years in Germany, where he had contacts with members of the Style, Dada, and the Bauhaus. Lissitzky collaborated with Kurt Schwitters on a copy of the Merz Journal. This one is nicknamed Nature, and encouraged artists to incorporate natural forms in their work. Schwitters helped Lissitzky, who was suffering from tuberculosis, find work designing graphics for Pelican Ink Company. The hand-drawn image illustrated by Lissitzky, borrowing a motif from Russian constructivism. Can you tell what it is? The compass-wielding hand from the photomontage, The Constructor, transformed into the hand of a Western consumer, draining it of its revolutionary ideology. In Berlin, Lissitzky produced one of his most important works for a Russian audience, a collection of poems by Mayakovsky. Using only the standard elements of letterpress available in any printer's typecase, letters, rules, and symbols, he created one of the most inventive series of layouts ever seen. This book was indexed with tabs, which you can see here, so that each individual poem could be readily found by someone reciting poems for an audience. His designs to illustrate the poems bear a closer relationship to the text than the series of photomontages that Rodchenko made for another of Mayakovsky's books. The poem Our March features letters that seem to literally march across the page. Lissitzky manages to assert control over the Dadaist chaos, creating a hybrid work that combines the frenetic energy of Dada with the discipline of constructivism. In this photomontage, Lissitzky took up the theme of athlete as hero in a dynamic work that combines a hurdler with a double exposure of Times Square in New York City. So if you look really closely, you can see the hurdler and then the city in the background. He sketched the image on the horizontal axis by cutting the montage in strips and pacing them down with slight spaces between the columns. On his return to the USSR, Lissitzky was instrumental in the production of Russian exhibitions in Europe. He designed a poster advertising an exhibition of Russian applied arts to be held in Zurich. It shows his continuing commitment to the Soviet cause. Two young Russians are shown, male and female, merged to symbolize the state's gender equality. And you can see, just like with the Stalin and Lenin poster, he combined their eyes. In Russia, the constructivist artists faced increasing social pressure throughout the 1930s to conform to Stalin's call for heroic themes and greater realism in the arts. Despite their devotion, members of the Russian avant-garde fell out of favor with the Soviet authorities, who became more openly hostile toward abstract art and design. However, international constructivism of Europe was only just beginning. It was especially powerful in Germany, and a number of native German artists dedicated themselves to an exploration of the potential of this universal abstract form. Censorship and arrest were a constant threat. Cluzis, loyal to the end, was arrested and executed in 1938.